same on all of them. The George Washington design at the back was designed by each state, and the states usually have these contests, competitions, or whatever for designing.
But I always think of the head as the back of the coin. I don't know why.
In numismatic culture, the face is called the obverse, and the other is called the reverse.
Right.
Okay. And in flip coins, then it's head and tail.
Yeah, I think I knew that.
Oh, our chair is 30 seconds late.
I remember a Sesame Street skit where the clever monster was very upset that they were calling heads and tails, but really was head and villain.
Yeah.
Good to know.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, Braun. Can you hear us? Okay.
I was going to say, yes, get in the queue.
Okay. Oh, yeah, he's in the queue. Okay. So, welcome to CALEXT. If it's not the meeting you intended, then you're probably in the wrong room. I see 4 persons on the line. Some of them are in the room also. Do we have any JavaScribe? Okay, thank you. Any minute takers? Everyone looks so busy on the laptop. Okay.
Ron, you have very stylish headgear.
Okay, so please take some time to read the Notwell, and though I don't expect people to be very aggressive, note that we won't tolerate aggressive behaviors. So I'm trying to. How do we escape from that?
Push the red button.
No, from the screen. I'm pressing escape.
Oh, you're right. For which one? For the.
Push screen slide, push here. Oh, okay. Okay.
It goes from figuring out how to use the Chromebook.
Okay.
It's not obvious.
So I have to look for. So here we are. So first presentation, Mike, is that easier for you? Do you want to take? Okay, so maybe we can have a GS calendar.
Sure. Do you want? Is there anything to do to get Mike in? I can do JS calendar first if you want.
Okay,
Sure.
so let's move.
Slides. That's another mic.
So that should be the. Okay.
I hit the press here for full screen mode.
This one?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. So I hope you all read the spec, but if not, is this on? No.
Yeah, I think it is. I think you just need to eat it.
I just need to, yes?
No. Not coming out of the speaker.
Looks like my dead battery.
Oh, you can take mine.
Okay. That one does work. Yeah. Okay. So, yes, so this is in last call. I did publish a new draft yesterday, which is mainly formatting and editorial revision to just try and make it as readable and understandable as possible. There were 2 small additions, which I've noted here on the slide. One was a extra property on the participant, where you could record a comment that they made whilst replying. This is a common feature that is already being represented in iCalendar with custom vendor-specific properties, and so I thought worth adding a standard property for. Like if you said maybe, you can write because it's my kid's birthday or something, and recurrence ID, which is also needed mapping from iCalendar, which is exactly the same as it is in iCalendar. So that's the only two actual changes, I think. We have the CALEXT v-alarm extensions draft will be discussed slightly later, which is adding some extra properties there. We need to make sure we match. I think we actually already do. The acknowledged property already exists on alerts, which is exactly the same as in that extension, so that you can synchronize dismissing an alert between different calendar clients. Snoozing alert is defined in that extension is actually a protocol thing rather than a data representation thing. There's no data representation for that, so it's not needed in JS Calendar. The only thing left, therefore, in there is proximity alerts. I don't know if we want to add that to the data model here, or you can always go in an extension. So if anyone has a particular view on whether we should try and add that in, you can step up. So this is the being able to store in the data model that an alert should fire when you enter or leave a certain physical location, which is being defined in this extension via alarm extensions for iCalendar. Should that be in JS Calendar?
Does this microphone, this microphone works.
Just put batteries
Brian, you're connected.
Excellent. So I was just going to ask, what's the extension model for the JS Calendar format? How would you mark something as an extension?
Well, I mean, it's extendable in the same way as iCalendar, that you can define new properties with future RFCs. That is the main extension model, and obviously you can have vendor-specific properties, but like in iCalendar, but we want to discourage those because they're not very interoperable.
Yeah, it's more how do you stop two vendors overriding each other? Do you have to prefix anything? Is this
because it's a data
specified
format.
clearly?
Because it's a data format, not a protocol. There's no possibility for negotiation for that kind of thing. So the spec already requires vendor-specific prefix for each custom property, which is domain name controlled by that vendor, so you can't get collision.
All right, and if we standardize something, how do we indicate which version?
Sorry, which version of what?
If we standardize an extension to JS Calendar, how does a reader of JS Calendar know which version it's reading?
Well, it's the property name that's standardized, and so that property name shouldn't be used because it's beforehand, because it's either until it's not clearly not one you can use for a vendor-specific property, and so until it's in a RFC or defined in a future standard, this just doesn't exist. This is just the same as in iCalendar or other formats, as I said, because it's a format, not the protocol. You can't negotiate a version or something else. That's up to whatever's using JS Calendar or using iCalendar. They can negotiate versions if need be.
Yeah, so the first time we redefine the behavior of a property, we're going to have issues.
If you redefine behavior of a
iCalendar does.
property,
Yeah.
yes, don't do that. Add new properties instead that are you can use, would be a better model.
Cool.
So, Daniel, do you know when the last call expires for this? I couldn't find it quickly.
So when the last call expires, I think it has expired for a long time, but I mean, there is no fixed limit for it, so we can run it as long as we want.
Sure. I think it is basically ready for publication at this point. So
Yeah.
I think we could set a deadline of another week or two to give people a chance to read the final draft, but then I would be looking to move this on.
Ken Murchison, regarding proximity alarms, since it's already deployed in the field in iCalendar, I think it'd be worthwhile putting in the spec as well.
So that was regarding proximity.
Yes.
Was it? Yes. Okay. Thanks.
So does it imply some changes to the current document, or?
Yeah, so one change of adding one extra property,
Okay.
one extra section into the alerts bit of a different trigger option,
Okay.
which is, I think Ken's right. It's been deployed in a vendor-specific way that's being standardized in this iCalendar extension, which we'll get to later. So we should probably just have it in the JS calendar from the start as well. So
Okay.
it's
So the other thing we can do also is have wait that the VLR is being sent and send them together. So that's also one option.
I don't think they need to be
Okay.
tied together, actually.
Okay.
I think we just define it separately in both.
Okay, I'm fine. So I think this draft got a significant number of review, especially compared to the usual average reviews we have. My opinion is that it's almost ready. We choose to have this long-term last call just to get more and more feedbacks. So the comments we received were discussed on the mailing list. I think it has been quite openly discussed and consensus has been reached. Yeah, I would consider this draft done. So I'm waiting a few weeks and sending to the ISG.
Great.
Thank you.
Oh, there's one next slide. So there's another related. So this is an informational RFC, which we're also going to publish. They don't need to be published concurrently. I think this one will go out afterwards, advising on JS calendar to iCalendar translation. It's informational because deliberately it's not a straight, it's not just a syntactical version of iCalendar like JCal is. So some translation bits for obscure edge cases, you can't do exact translation, so you might want to do different things in different situations. I think almost all commonly used features in iCalendar is quite straightforward, and so it's worth documenting just so people have that reference. I think Robert Stepanak, who is the co-author on JS Calendar, will finish this document off. He's away on leave for the next month or so, but I don't think there's a rush to get that out. So I'm just noting that there's a draft up. It's actually reasonably complete, and we'll finish that off after JS Calendar is published.
Okay, right. So this one might stay in working group last call, while the other one goes to the end.
Yeah, I don't even know if this one is in working group last call or whether it's separate. I didn't actually check.
What I think is that we started a working group last call for one document that was split.
And then we split it. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So
there are two in it, but it's just a label. So
yeah. Okay.
Okay. Any comment? No. So let's move. Michael, did you solve the I/O issues?
He solved it temporarily, and now it might be problematic again.
Okay. So maybe we go to VLR.
Sure.
Okay, so this draft is one I inherited from the original author at Apple. I think it's fairly straightforward. It documents existing practice. It's already been deployed. We're trying to standardize it so that other implementations can follow suit. So first thing it does, this I think is fairly uncontroversial. It standardizes that pretty much every component now should have a UID so they can be uniquely identified. And that's all this does. So if you got multiple arms, they will each have their own UID. So if any reason to address them in some shape or form, it's easy to do so. Next slide. As Neil had mentioned earlier, alarm acknowledgement is a big thing, especially if you have multiple clients that are all firing different alarms. It'd be nice to, at least when the first one fires, you write back some type of property saying, I've acknowledged this, so that your other clients don't continue to fire. And that is done on the next slide with this new acknowledge property, which Neil's already discussed. Is basically just the UTC time that you acknowledge the alarm. When the event gets updated, other clients should see it and not continue to fire. Snoozing alarms, this is a pretty standard thing that people won't like to do. What this does is just formalize a procedure for doing so. So when you hit snooze on your device, what happens is a new alarm that's a sibling of the one that fired, meaning it's under the same parent component, will get created with a UTC time to fire. And in theory, you could add multiples of these if you wanted to. And when each one reaches its conclusion, you can do the same thing with the acknowledged property to stop that. Last item, location-based alarms or proximity alarms, as Neil described. Anybody that has a iPhone has probably seen this in action. Basically, what it means is you fire the alarm as you enter or leave a particular location. In this case, there's a new structured location property which is defined in Mike's event publication draft. In this particular situation, the URI that you would use would be a geo-URI, specifying the location that you want to fire upon. There's also two other values that can be used for the proximity alarm that Apple is currently using. We felt it would be fine to standardize them here as well. This is the connect and disconnect. These actually occur, I believe, with Apple CarPlay, so that when you enter your car and a Bluetooth signal or the Bluetooth connection gets made, you can fire alarms based on those. I don't know what the use case is, but Apple seemed to think it was important enough to put them in their draft, and I don't think there's any reason to not put them in this particular draft unless somebody feels differently. They're basically just values in a registry, and here's a simple example of what one of these things might look like with the geo-URI.
Just one question. Sure. So the alarm is based on a geographic area, or can I say 8 o'clock anytime, anywhere in the world?
This one is only based on physical location.
Okay.
Neil, yes.
Yeah, it's Neil Jenkins. What was I thinking? Oh yeah, the connect disconnect. Just wonder if we want to have some other property of saying connect disconnect what? Like it could, if you omit it, it could be device specific, which then is whatever Apple wants it to be when Apple are using it, but it's perhaps slightly overly specific at the moment. I think in the spec it's like a car Bluetooth, which you wouldn't infer necessarily directly from the fact that it just says called connect. Is that right? Do I remember that right from the spec? It is specifically a car Bluetooth at the moment.
I think the text stipulates that one use case is the Bluetooth scenario.
Or is that meant to be just one use case?
Yeah, I don't think it's not directly tied to that. It could be any type of connect or disconnect type event. Again, I'm not wedded to this. I'm not going to die on this hill if we determine that it's too vague or too specific to put in the spec.
It seems potentially useful, but I just can't imagine when I would actually use it right now.
But like you said, it doesn't specifically say connect or disconnect from what. So it may be underspecified. So.
And do the people from Apple, can we ask them, or
if we can find anybody who's still on the calendar team that's willing to answer.
Okay.
This is Barry, not as AD, just sort of having stepped into this. So we're kind of overloading calendars to do other, because calendars do alarms, we're setting up alarms that are not temporal based, which is what a calendar is.
Well, in this case, the proximity alarm would be most likely in a task, not in an event. So you set yourself up a task to pick up milk, and the alarm fires when you leave the office or get close to the market or what have you.
I'll buy that. Okay. Thanks for filling me in.
You're welcome.
I haven't read the draft, but have you thought of privacy considerations for this?
That has not been fleshed out, no.
Okay. Well, a lot of geolocation information is quite personal, so at least need some text around that. But.
Neil Jenkins again. Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing there is just don't let other people add alarms with proximity on it to your calendar, because that might then be a way of them firing.
You have to have had some experience with the GeoPriv working group to understand the issues here. There's a huge privacy issues around geolocation.
So do the ADs have any reference to suggested text that might cover this?
You should talk with Richard Barnes or Alyssa Cooper, who were chairs of the GeoPrev working group, and they can tell you all you would like to know about it.
Far more than you.
So I did, Neil Jenkins again, I did just check the spec. It currently says connected to a Bluetooth enabled automobile, which does sound slightly specific to me.
Make it an example. Yeah, so
In general, it would be a good idea to have a chat with Alyssa about this before she has to review it as an AD, because she's almost certain to put a discuss on it about privacy issues if you haven't already sorted that out.
Right, okay. Fair enough. Any other discussion points before we see if Mike is back online? Okay, well, let me get out of here before he loses connectivity again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I'm wondering, Braun, do you want to say something?
Not particularly.
So I'm going to let the floor to Mike.
I do have a slight hint of advice that I would suggest that you open all the slides in separate tabs.
So, I didn't hear you, Braun.
open slides in separate tabs.
Okay, yeah.
Easier to navigate.
Michael? Michael, can you hear us?
He says he doesn't think anyone can hear him.
Okay.
Seems correct.
So, well, maybe I can start the time zone discussion we had, and anytime Michael is ready, you take the slot. Does it work for the people in the room as well?
Yes.
Okay. So, time zone distribution system is basically a discussion we initiated a few weeks ago, I think, or maybe 1 week ago. And the reason for starting that discussion was mostly that INA had this budget discussion for a 4 years plan, so we just wanted to see if there's something ready we could ask them to do, or so that it became planned. So far, I'm just going to try to summarize all the different things that have been discussed on the mailing list. And but the big conclusion is, well, there are some people are quite enthusiastic about doing something so that the TZ data be appropriately distributed with a given protocol, time zone distribution. But on the other hand, we're not very much ready to propose either a system or a protocol for the INA. So we're basically asking the INA to remain in touch with those discussions so that they can jump anything we're saying or thinking something wrong. So among the different feedbacks we received some, well, I would say some insight that we're clearly not ready. We need to better understand the global ecosystem, better reach out the people that are expected to deploy this time zone distribution before defining the system, to understand what their needs are, and then to elaborate a system to understand the resources involved for that system, to better qualify all the requirements in terms of resource as well as usage, and probably then evaluate how the protocol we have been designing so far, which is mostly time zone distribution, but maybe also the data, the time zone data we have defined how much they fit all this system. So on the list, there were at least two different things that have been suggested as a time zone distribution service. One, which was a sort of global service, and another one which was a sort of distribution master. So we need to really focus on, well, apparently the distribution master is probably the one we want to target, but we need to have this kind of discussion to understand exactly what our targets should be. And the reason a global service may not make sense is that the people distributing the time zone data sometimes do not actually necessarily distribute the time zone data as provided by the INR, but sometimes they add some tweaks and some adjustments. So that's how those data is being used that our protocol needs to fit. What about the resources? So the amount of data, though it needs much more studies. Well, it's 0.5 megabyte for 200 kilobytes, 100 kilobytes. So it's not huge data. That's one thing. So the largest is the V time zones, the iCalendar.
You probably have a button to pick your whole slide on the screen, by the way. Move the mouse.
No, it's marked. The thing says what the button is to make it full screen.
Yeah, it's not full screen. That is.
It's over full screen.
Oh, okay.
It's clipping.
So then, how do you?
I don't know. Usually there's a thing that changes. I don't know. It's not showing up.
That's okay. Well, it's good.
Yeah.
This is just.
Okay.
Yeah, we can make it.
So in other words, it's very small.
Yeah, it's not. It depends how many times this small data is being distributed, but it's not terabytes.
Not even megabytes.
So the frequencies. So that's the frequencies of the release, which is not exactly the same as how many changes appears, because usually you have a set of changes that is being that generates one release, and so that I don't really know. So some people were complaining that a sad thing is that they have to wait for the next release so that the things that have been fixed are not directly pushed, or they can't deliver those changes. So it might be something by improving the synchronization, we may have a finer granularity than the release that are currently being used. Though I don't know how much impact are the changes on the time zone in 1945 or so. yeah, I don't know exactly what makes a new release and what makes an update, or will the update concern only the latest data, the current date, the data at the current date, or hold the history? So estimation of the growth per year is 5%, but that's a number that was taken from the mind of Paul Eger. So no studies have been done. It's just raw data. Worst case was 80, where we have 18 release. So it's still in our alphabet, so we can still have a letter for synchronization. So caching the data per minute, to me it looks quite aggressive, but that's only my view. So it's it doesn't weigh much, but that's something we have to understand, how much valid would be the cache, and what are the impact of one time zone server being offline for some time. So Paul suggested that being a 90% would be something feasible and valuable. So not a huge constraint, except for the minutes, but maybe I misunderstood the minutes. Protocol changes. The time zone distribution does not, it's not that you cannot retrieve the full data, but there is currently no way to retrieve the database, because it's only JSON. And I don't know if there is a gain to provide a full database versus it passed into JSON. So I think that was some of the protocol changes that have been suggested. In any case, the idea is to be able to optimize the synchronization process to the data we need, I think, overall. Checking the leap second consistency with NTP client. I think someone is jumping. Oh, that's Mike. So I'm finished.
So you don't hit the red button.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, right. No, I was actually going to make a comment there that it's, while there's no specific, it doesn't specifically have to be JSON. I mean, TZDist already delivers iCalendar and the new format that Ken came up with. So extending it to provide other data is not a big problem.
Oh, yeah. So in any of these things we mentioned, I don't see any major issue. The main issue is that it's not here today. So that was my perception. But Neil
Jenkins. So who's the intended use of this? Not directly to like end laptops or something.
So that's part of what I call the ecosystem that we need to understand better before deploying anything or asking someone else to deploy. But there are two things: either it's your laptop or it's time server your laptop, or let's say phone is being connected to.
I mean, a 90% uptime is never going to work for, like, on initial startup. It won't have any cache data. It needs to be able to fetch it. So that's, at that point, that doesn't work.
So what doesn't work?
Well, you mentioned that they thought 90% availability would be fine because people will cache stuff.
Oh.
But that doesn't work if it's their primary source. It would have to be preloaded. And then how out of date is it? The other thing is that a single source that gets pushed out everywhere immediately, ooh, that sounds like a movie plot scenario waiting to go wrong. Just a thought.
Well, it's sort of that now, except very slow.
Slowest chance to catch things.
Ken Murchison, so the thought behind this was when there are those last minute changes to a time zone, because there's basically no lead time given by the governing bodies that make those decisions, that rather than having to wait for your OS vendor to roll up a patch with the new time zone, if IANA had a server which is then feeding the OS vendors, whoever they might be, then your client just goes out and fetches that from your vendor. And it could do that daily or once every couple hours to see if there's any new changes.
Neil Jenkins again, sure, but you don't actually need the IANA server bit for that. Like, it changes so infrequently, as we said, it would be trivial for the OS vendor to have a separate server they can just update that it syncs from that's not part of their patch process, which is the main thing in that system, not the fact that there's an IANA server.
I wanted to just hop in here with going back to that previous slide where we said that there've been at most 18 updates per year. Part of the reason for that is that places can't update immediately and guarantee that every device will get it. If you could update your time zone and guarantee that every device in the world would be correct, I suspect it might happen more frequently. So we don't want to encourage governments to do silly things.
So yeah, anyway, just in relation to previous discussion, having some protocol or procedure on top of HTTP with different media types to be returned would be a service, good thing for IETF to do, irrespective of whether IANA is involved in this, sort of to follow up on your.
Jonathan X, yeah, I do believe there's some effort to batch up these updates exactly because, there's, it's a fairly heavyweight process for all the consumers of it to push a new version to their customers and whatnot. And, there's certainly, what they refer to as the silly season of the spring and fall when various people see their daylight savings time transition coming up and decide, oh, we're going to move it by a week starting tomorrow or whatever, which would be, if it were a lighter weight process for updates to get pushed, there probably would be updates more frequently. I also wanted to say, I feel like given that TZ-DIST is an HTTP-based protocol, if this is not something which, a CDN could handle, scaling out to potentially billions of people receiving it, we've done something wrong, because that's what they're good at, especially when we're talking about things that are in the, tens of kilobytes.
And so a last point was about how to authenticate the data provided by the IANA, because that would provide a means to do not authenticate as a source. You're retrieving the data, and so that might help. To be able to publish intermediary results. So the TZ database is on GitHub, so you have the commit also. And the other thing is to be able to authenticate the data as well as what your publisher has been published. Tweaking to that. So I'm too much biased with DNSSEC, so but that's the kind of things we have to think about. So some of the next steps, I think an important one would be to reach the publishers. Maybe I didn't remember the second bullet was there, but let's go to the third one. To discuss a little bit better what is with them, the time zone distribution system requirement, the usage, and so on. Go to the protocol, the data, because some of the metadata have not yet been standardized. And so if there is significant interest, we go to the AD probably have a dedicated working group.
Can I ask a ignorant question? What do you mean by publisher? Who are publishers?
Oh, the time zone distribution system your laptop or mobile is connected to. So it could be Apple, Linux.
Right. Okay. So like OS vendors who are interested in distributing this. All right. Fine. Yes. Not people trying to say, change my time zone in my country.
Oh, no.
Right.
This is Barry. My preference would be for a small group, say a design team, to just informally get together, start working on this, make a proposal, and then think about whether we should charter a working group based around that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't see that the next target should be to work on a working group, but it's rather to have these ongoing discussions. Probably to do that across the 2 mailing lists we have, 3 mailing lists, because the TZ, TZ Dist, and CALEXT might. I mean,
Right.
we can live with that.
The right answer is to pick one of those and have the
Okay.
discussions there, not have them across the 3.
Okay.
You can, socialize it on the 3 working groups, but pick one for the discussion to
Okay.
happen.
So that's probably on me. That.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Quick question. You just said 3 working groups. What other 2 working groups? 3 mailing lists?
Yeah.
What are the mailing lists where this is going to be tossed around,
So,
talked about?
I will let you know which is the one, but the 3 ones are CalX, which is calcify. One is time zone distribution, BIS, and the other one is time zone, which is hosted by IANA.
So probably time zone distribution IETF mailing list,
Is the
which might become a working group mailing list should you come up with a credit.
okay?
So to put what Alexei just said on the microphone so the remote participants can hear, probably the time zone dist mailing list, because that's the one that's likely to be where the discussion falls if we make a working group. So,
There's going to be the BIS then.
Yes.
time, yeah.
Okay. That might answer my question, because we were talking about in an earlier meeting this week that we didn't want all this discussion necessarily go on the mailing list where they're talking about changes, right? Okay.
Not going there.
Okay.
But a pointer to the discussion will be posted there so those people know where it's happening.
Perfect.
Actually, the TZ people were excluding the 2 other lists and keeping on discussing that. Okay, so I think it's Mike. Brown, do you have anything to say?
I've already said what I wanted to on TZ Dist. I have uploaded my slides about the CalConnect stuff, which I'll do in any other business at the end if we have time.
Okay, good. I think we have time. So I give the floor to Mike.
The button didn't work.
Okay.
There it goes.
Ah, you can hear me. Good. Do you want to put my slides back up again? Hopefully this will be fairly quick.
Not that one.
Event pub.
That's a different working group.
Oh,
Right, yeah. Mike looks distinctly different from Henning.
No, they're similarly close up to the camera.
Okay.
so for some reason, where is CalX? Rendering extensions.
There we are. A very short presentation.
Okay.
And these are just the remaining, what I think are the remaining issues, and I hope they've been dealt with. If you can just slip to the next slide. So there was a lot of discussion around my changes to the source property. I think, and I suggested that really what I should probably do is just drop that and use structured data instead. The whole intent of source was to provide some other way, a way to provide a link or the content of something that was providing the data for, say, a participant, a vCard or something of that kind. I think structured data actually works fine for that. So I suggested on the list that I drop all these changes and just use structured data. I think I got one response back. So I think that's where I'm going to go with that. And whereas I thought we were sort of done, and then this whole discussion started about structured data. So I'd like to get that closed before I move on. And I think that we probably need to re-justify the point of having structured data as against using attach. It's the problem with attach, as it says here, is for a start, we didn't mention this in the spec when we talked about this, that attach firstly only allows encoded data. So you can have unencoded data in the structured data property. I think Ken raised the point that some implementations have managed attachments, so they strip attachments off and just provide a pointer to them. We don't want that happening with structured data. It's really to be carried along with the thing. And we didn't want to extend attach in any way because we're going to run into some strange backward compatibility issues here. So we, in the end, we decided a new property was a cleaner and easier way of dealing with this. We've done this kind of thing. I did this kind of thing before we even thought of structured data for OASIS. There is a need to transport a well-defined payload. It may not be calendar data as such, but it's related. It's something that is related to the event. And so we invented something in OASIS for the smart grid stuff, but in fact I would have used structured data if that had been appropriate, if it had been around at the time. The advantage of the thing of having a schema was always that clients can simply see what this property is before they even parse it and ignore it if they're not interested. It can also allows them to steer events to different calendars if they recognize them as such. And I think in the discussion about, what was it called, the maintenance thing that brought up the whole structured data discussion, that was one of his requirements. As these events come through, they don't go straight into a regular calendar. They get steered to a different calendar that's related to maintenance. You can recognize that from the schema without actually parsing it. And that's, I think, is an advantage. So what was the next slide? Oh yeah, and there'd been a suggestion that we should use a MIME type instead of schema, and that attach already supported that. But that means we have to keep defining MIME types to map them onto schemas when we already have a schema. The MIME type doesn't define the data model. It simply defines the way you represent it. It's JSON or XML or whatever. And schema.org has a specific MIME type for their JSON data, but then they have the schema. And yes, I guess we could have extended attach to add a schema, but again, we've got backward compatibility issues and the rest of it. And that's not to say you couldn't use attach. That's not to say you couldn't use a MIME type if that seemed appropriate. And it's not to say you couldn't redefine all this data as calendar data if, again, that seemed appropriate. But a lot of the stuff we're trying to transport isn't calendar data. It's a payload. And I guess my last point was, though we've been talking a lot about schema.org, it wouldn't have to be schema.org. They could be defined anywhere, including in the IETF. And the other point I was going to make about this is there's a big advantage to keeping all this payload separate from calendar data. We want to keep the model simple. If we start extending the iCalendar or the JS calendar or whatever data model every time we want to transport something, it's going to get ridiculously complicated, and it's simply not necessary. We don't have to absorb everything into the data model. We just need to recognize we're transporting data along with the event. So that really is all I have to say on that. Any comments? I mean, I guess the question I have is, do we just go ahead as things stand with the current spec? I mean, I think this discussion opened up a load of questions. I think that we're fine as we are, other than removing the source. I'm ready with the next version of the draft. How do others feel?
So someone is at the mic.
Okay. Hi, Mike. This is Michelle from IANA. I just had a really quick question. In our tracker, we did an expert review with Cyrus Dabu, and he said that there is still an issue that needs to be addressed by the author. And he spoke with, were you the author? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so he said he spoke with you, but he did say that there were some remaining issues that needed discussion and feedback from the working group list. And so I think that's just one part of preventing IANA from saying, okay, just curious of what you discussed here, if that's part of what Cyrus had a problem with and hasn't been fixed, or is that still outstanding?
Yes. I think I've got a draft ready which covers a lot of the points he talked about were to do with the ABNF issues and the rest of it. But one of his big problems was source and how that was being extended. And so this is what sort of triggered my thoughts about that. And with the other comments people have made about source, I'd say in the end, it occurred to me structured data was a perfectly reasonable way to do what I was trying to do with source. And so I think I've addressed all his comments. I do need to go back and go through the list, but I certainly went through his list of comments.
Okay, just making sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Alexa, please use the microphone.
Probably needs another check with Cyrus once there is a new draft version.
Yes, I would like him to have another go over it, yes.
Okay, any other questions, feedback?
Neil Jenkins. I've only skimmed this draft and followed the mailing list a bit more loosely than some of the other things, but the main contentious point has been whether something should be attached or whether structured data is useful as an alternative to that. Is that right, Mike?
Yes.
Yes.
Probably yes. Or even if you should be having payloads of this kind anyway. I mean, part of the suggestion was this all needs to be specified as iCalendar properties.
I agree that I think specifying as iCalendar properties is overkill and makes everything way more complicated than is necessary, especially when there are existing schemas like the ones you referenced to. So I would strongly disagree with that as a solution. I think what's happening is fine. I can see how you could embed them as attached things, but it's hard to like quantify, but it does feel different enough that embedding it as you've done with the structured data seems like a reasonable solution to me.
I would say that for going forward with JS Calendar, we should perhaps, maybe we wouldn't have the backward compatibility issues. I mean, the two are close, just this generic attachment and this payload. We could probably combine the two in JS Calendar because we can move forward and we could distinguish between the things. And that may be worth thinking about. But I think if for iCalendar, to avoid backward compatibility issues and the rest of it, this makes more sense.
Neil, yeah, well, with the JS Calendar, yeah, the nice thing is these schema things are in JSON as well, so you could just embed them in trivially, and that's a definite advantage over the attaches. You're not having to parse anything again, it's just reading further properties. But also, yes, they are not part of the JS Calendar thing. You're not finding new properties for every single one of these things. So it certainly makes a lot of sense in that context, I think.
Any other? So do we expect its draft? My understanding is that this draft is almost done. Is it? Am I correct?
Yes, I should go over the Cyrus points once more just to make sure I caught all of those, and I've already got it with the source stuff removed, so I think I'm ready to submit another draft, and hopefully that'll be close to it.
Okay. So we're making good progress. And then I think, Brown, that's your presentation.
Yes, hello. I just slapped this together last night because, you know, being organized and all that. This is just, I guess, a primer for anyone who doesn't know what's with CalConnect, which I suspect is pretty much nobody here, but also letting people know the dates of the next CalConnect meeting and inviting people. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So a bit of background on CalConnect. It was set up to allow companies who are working on new products to test their interoperability without the public relations problem of the whole world knowing what they're working on and starting to harass them about it. We've now moved to meeting just twice a year. So we're meeting October in Philadelphia, and then we'll be in San Francisco in, I think, April. So moving to a 6-monthly schedule. I put the link in here to the minutes from the last time we met, which was a video chat from the CalConnect session in Bedford for CalExt members to join in. We didn't have very many people, but we'll do the same thing again so that we can have CalConnect people meet hopefully as well. Next slide, please. We store our public drafts in GitHub from CalConnect. There are many documents there in various states. The documents Mike and Ken have been talking about have been cherry-picked out of there as the ones which we think are in good enough state to bring to IETF. Some things there we've looked at and said they've either moot, they've died in the meantime, no one's interested in them, or they've been subsumed into JS Calendar. But there is additional work there. In some cases, it's things that have been in the wild for years, and so we're going to try and bring those ones to IETF as informational standards, so at least there is a public document that's in a fixed place that people can come and see how random stuff they see on the wire actually works. Next slide. Yep. So the other thing that CalConnect's working on is contacts. The JS contact specification is over in dispatch. Didn't manage to get dispatched at the last IETF, and we're not quite there for this IETF, but we've found a co-author, and that's moving forwards. There's additional work on vCard happening, and over the last year, CalConnect became a member of ISO and is working in ISO on the dates and name standards, which we will need for that. The last thing, of course, is that we are keen to get additional people working on this at the moment. Ken and Mike are taking all the documents, as you saw with EventPub. Mike basically took a document that was originally written by an author at Apple and has been shepherding it since then. We'd love to have more people come in and volunteer to work on these documents. The main thing that delays our bandwidth is reviewer time within this group, but also the number of authors that we have available. So if anyone in this group or anyone they know, any junior people who would love to get their name on an RFC and get more experience, this is a great place for anyone with calendar experience to get involved. That's all what I've got.
And
Some
this is
people are at the
Barry.
mic.
So as I recall, I have a discuss open on the event pub document, which I suppose I should have brought up when Michael was talking, but I wasn't thinking. That we're supposed to discuss with the CalConnect people. So that ought to be on the agenda for the joint meeting this time. I thought it was supposed to be on the joint meeting agenda for the last time. But it has to do with the extensive use of URIs, or the extensive option of putting URIs in the event pub stuff, and my concern about URIs that get automatically resolved by calendar clients and what that can do when you have URIs that can be malicious, that can point to malicious things. So that's a discussion we need to have somewhere, either here or with CalConnect during the interim.
Sorry, Neil Jenkins, actually, that's just reminded me, Barry, thanks. That's a very good point in that due to privacy concerns of IP addresses and local information, Fastmail and know a lot of other companies are moving towards anything like that that's embedded. We fetch via our servers and proxy, like within an email, any images or things that we want to load for the user, we do on their behalf so that it's not leaking their IPs and cookies. We would have to start doing the same thing, stuff in calendar events, and we can do that, but it increases the risk of those kind of privacy leaks and makes it harder, whereas the structured data thing, stuff that must be embedded, makes that a lot easier because there isn't an external thing you have to fetch in order to be able to display it.
Right, and pointing out that a lot of times these kinds of URIs are customized per user, so as soon as you fetch it, that identifies the user that it had been sent to. So yeah, there's lots of issues here.
Ken Murchison, unrelated point, just a correction, the April 2020 CalConnect meeting will be in the UK, not in San Francisco. Just so people aren't.
Okay, thanks.
So they're going to the right continent.
So if there are no other comments, well, thank you, Brown, for staying online at that time of the night. Oh, it's very okay. It's very early.
It's 7 a.m. for me now.
Not quite.
Okay.
It wasn't.
Okay. And I think we can adjourn the meeting. So thank you very much, and see you next time in the interim meeting. Oh, we didn't have blue sheets.
Yes. So these guys.
Hi, none of the blue sheets will be a very small one.
Yeah.